Film critic for WOR Radio. Let's have a huge round of applause, please, for Giant Little One. So special, and it is my honor to welcome writer-director Keith Behrman, producer Allison Black, Josh Wiggins, Taylor Hickson, Darren Mann, and Kyle MacLachlan. Welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on a terrific film. So meaningful, so insightful, so astute. Keith, let's just talk about the origins of it. It comes from a very interesting place, right? Of kind of, you had an interesting way of coming to the story.
Yeah, I came to this story through a dream. I dreamt one night of a young man talking to his mother in the kitchen, and something about that dream just intrigued me. It was the love between the mother and the son and their connection and the intimacy. And I just started writing some notes about that. And over the following days, I kept staying interested in that dream. It kept hanging up. I was holding on to me, and so I kept writing more notes. And eventually, felt like a story was coming out of that.
It's very insightful about the emotions of high schoolers, and very, very smart and astute about kind of the way those emotions can kind of feed into other things. Did you do any research by talking to kids today and kind of getting a beat on what was going on?
Not really. I did when the idea became more apparent what it was about and what it was going to involve. Then I went to a high school and I spoke to teachers at first because I wanted to just see how they would handle some of the things that happened in the story. And then I eventually talked. I wrote. I think then by the time we actually had a draft, I think I showed it to some high school kids to see what they thought about it, and they affirmed that it felt true to them. So that was good.
Allison, I know the conversation you kind of had with Keith early on, about 2.5, 3 years ago or so, about this story, and you kind of saw it through to the point that we're at tonight. What were some of the things about those early conversations, or maybe even early moments of the script, that you wanted to make sure maintained all the way through to the finished product, the finished film?
Well, one of the things that Keith and I talked about from the very beginning was, even though this was going to deal with some challenging conflicts in these young people's lives and in the parents' lives, we wanted it to feel, in the end, radiant. That was a word that we kept using. And we also talked about it as, because we really wanted to capture the authenticity of youth and the way we feel, too, and we're not teenagers anymore, but we sort of, I think everyone here tunes into their inner teenager no matter what their age is that we really wanted it to feel like a pop song, but a really good pop song, hopefully, we would achieve that, where you get pulled along and you think you know what it is and you're kind of caught up in the swell of it, but something much more meaningful and significant is actually happening when you achieve a really good pop song. So that was the goal from the beginning, and so that was all based around keeping it as authentic as possible. And just to go back, Keith really did test it with high school students, but we didn't just test it with high school students. We tested it with people of all different age groups and decades, and people who identified in every different way, and said, how do you feel about this? What do you think about this? Tell us what you think. And when it came back, and when we knew we were ready to cast it and seek the financing, is when there were no more comments. And I have to say, it's testament to Keith's writing. He's a beautiful writer. There were very few comments when we arrived at that point where we were like, what do you think? So, yeah, kudos to you.
Just to rip on the idea of the music for a second, because we were speaking about this last night, that there's a notion to the movie that it feels very much like these kids riding bikes or kind of going around their business, and the energy that the film gets from the score, from the songs being used, kind of underscores exactly the intensity that's going on inside them. It's not just an everyday thing of a kid riding a bike or a kid walking down the hallway. The emotions that they have are turbulent and intense, right? Yeah, and the score and the soundtrack and the songs all represent that.
Yeah. The score was. We spent a lot of time working on this soundtrack. I really have to hand it to Allison because she really had a vision for that was even beyond my vision of it. And we did the temp track, of course, in the edit, and there were some songs that we thought really captured the film. And then Allison had a connection to Chris Toritas, who's our music supervisor, and he's an amazing. He's helped found KCRW in LA, and he's just a huge music person in North America. And he knew what we were going for, and he saw the songs we had as an attempt track, and he just provided us with a lot of great music that we could consider, and he talked a lot about what we were trying to do, and he really curated the soundtrack.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a round of applause for our three amazing young cast members here. Josh Wiggins, Darren. Josh, there's something about your performance. Frankie feels very watchful to me. Like there's definitely a sense to him that, you know, it can be just sort of an easy type of thing, but he's obviously watching around. He's very aware and wary of things going on around him. What were some of the keys to the performance for you?
Yeah, I mean, Frankie starts out, you know, he's obviously very confident in who he is, and he's confident in his skin. And then once this event happens, it kind of shakes the foundation of what he thought he knew. And I think that, you know, the difference between Frankie and Bowles is that Frankie wants to acknowledge this incident and get ahead of it. And I think that's reflected in how he behaves in certain scenes, early on anyways. So I think once he, you know, he's trying to repair this damage that's happened, and then once he finds out that he can't, or that it's, you know, maybe a little bit more, there's more of a rift between them than he originally thought, it kind of, you know, his character kind of deteriorates after that a little bit. So I wanted to go through that, you know, that arc, recognizing that, but also, you know, through his dad, he kind of reconciles himself and kind of finds peace within himself. So it was a really fun arc to play around with, and it was great to act off these fine fellows.
And I just want to note, it's the kind of thing you sometimes don't notice or take for granted as you're watching a film, but Josh is in almost every scene of this film. Every moment is kind of seen through Frankie's eyes. So every scene is sort of it's on Josh's shoulders in some ways. And I'm wondering, Josh, as you kind of approach the script and approach the film, were you aware of kind of that arc and making sure that there was sort of a nice through line all the way through?
Yeah, I mean, it's written pretty clearly, and the best thing about the scripts from the, you know, something you can tell very early on is that it's written very authentically, and that's what you want as an actor, because you don't want dialogue that sounds inauthentic, because then you sound inauthentic. So, you know, it was something that was apparent very early on. It makes it really fun to play around with, and also working with Keith, who's very open, and, you know, he's open to new ideas and different interpretations of certain dialogue and certain qualities of the characters, so it made it really enjoyable to play around with.
You do such a beautiful job. And Taylor, as do you. The thing about Natasha, I feel, is that she obviously starts out as a very insular character. We're kind of getting to know her in quiet ways, just as obviously Frankie's kind of getting to know her again. What were some of the challenges for you in kind of bringing her to the fore and all these things about her on the inside, bringing them out?
Well, I just wanted to make sure I brought to light everything that Keith had written, because it's such a beautiful script, and I wanted to play that as truthfully as possible. So I brought a lot of my personal experiences and my feelings and how I navigated high school and my similarities with Natasha. I did my best to bring that to light.
I love how she and Frankie sort of find themselves kind of towards the end, kind of embracing their outsiderness or embracing like an aspect of them that, you know, obviously for high school it's always a time of transition, a time of figuring out who you are, and they really embrace that self-identity aspect, right?
I think the alcoholic slushies helped with that.
And in terms of kind of just figuring out Natasha's role, kind of coming to that that's really like a nice sort of element to her, isn't it? Of kind of, you know, identifying herself as somebody she could actually like again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed having her set up as someone who maybe seems more of like a background character, and then her becoming more evident as the story comes out, and you see there's a lot more to her, a lot more depth, and she becomes very dynamic and very, very prominent in Frankie's life. And yeah, it's just beautifully written, and it was so much fun to collaborate in a safe space. And yeah, it helped heal me as an individual too. So I'll be forever grateful for that.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I just think that I think one of the things that I think is a key moment for their relationship is after they have their slushy scene and they have their little sexual encounter again, and the next day when they go to school and then Natasha says, "See you later, faggot," and he goes, "See ya, ho." I mean, even though I wrote it, I had to say I love that, because I mean, as a person who well, there's like I often say, I don't actually really take responsibility for the story and the writing, because it's a gift and it comes, and I get to actually have the pleasure of watching it happen too. So I can enjoy it in another way that's separate from the person who wrote it. But anyways, I love that, and then they just, of course, they just nailed it. These two just nailed it so beautifully in the hallway, which makes me, enjoy it even more. But I think that's just a beautiful moment where they really are there for each other, and accept each other, and they just decide to take this thing that is working against them and go, fuck it, we're gonna own it, and we're gonna
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
These shows are really on the same wavelength too. Like they're like have a very shared energy and understanding of each other that I think no one else in the school or community has at that point.
Yeah, they found each other in a really good, in a place where they were both in need and they both benefit each other. So it's really beautifully written relationship.
They see the best in each other too.
Yeah.
They see the best in each other, which is special, I think.
It's a beautiful moment in a film full of beautiful moments. Darren, there's also there's a tricky thing about Ballas, because obviously Frankie is walking a tightrope in his own way, but Ballas is also walking a different kind of tightrope that's sort of obviously parallel to it. But on one side is sort of that a more a tendency towards more violence and more kind of classic masculinity, and an awareness of kind of how he is. What were some of the keys to him for you in kind of walking that tightrope?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's the kind of script that you get in your email inbox that right away you're like, damn, I gotta work on this. This is special. All the characters were so well fleshed out, nothing was contrived. And for me, from the beginning, it was, I wanted to make him as dynamic as possible. If I can make the antagonist have any bit of sympathy from the audience, then I think I'm doing my job. Not necessarily understand what he's doing, but if I can get them to, see why he's doing what he's doing, then hopefully I've done my job.
So it is very dynamic, and in fact, the two moments that echo each other obviously is when Ballas stops the bully from picking on the one kid in the locker room, and then obviously later on in the film we see him step away, and even by stepping away, there's a dynamic quality to his choice there to not help Frankie in that similar moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's his own worst enemy for sure. I mean, he's battling a lot. There's a lot going on inside, and that was really fun to play with throughout the film, the inner struggle, because I think that was really the main key for Ballas, was all the stuff going on inside of him and what he was dealing with. And it's a tough world that he's living in, trying to deal with what he's dealing with. A locker room, a high school, it's not easy places. So there was a lot there for me to work with, and it was a lot of fun.
It's very heartbreaking to watch.
Darren had to walk the finest line out of anybody in the movie for sure. So give him his credit.
I think, when we did auditions, Darren was one of the very few, if not the only person really, who came in and brought both sides. You can see this tenderness underneath the bravado and the physique of that character's body and whatnot. And I think that, it comes to a culmination, and I think Darren did such a beautiful, understated, but really heartfelt rendition when in the hallway after, near the end, when Frankie approaches him all beat up and says, just looks at him in the hallway, and he says, what do you want? And they walk him. Frankie walks away, and then Ballas' girlfriend walks away. I think just Darren, what he did with his eyes there, just watching these two people walk away from him, and he's realized he's left on his own. He's lost both of them. That was such a magnificent example of the work he was doing in the film.
And that was the last scene shot, right?
Yeah. It's beautiful and beautifully complex in so many ways. Ladies and gentlemen, Kyle MacLachlan. Kyle, there's so many moments in here that are so beautiful, and the scenes that Ray has with his son, there's a beautiful sort of inner quiet strength to him, and a sense of a man who is trying to figure out his son and trying to imbue his conversations with him with not too much pushiness, but with the same kind of sense of inner strength. I'm wondering what some of the keys were for him for you, and how you kind of helped figure him out.
Well, I was just sitting here thinking about how much Ray was really on the outside looking in and just waiting for an opening and trying to be so careful and understanding of the situation that he had helped create. And finally there was a little opening, and in a couple of our scenes in the car, it's like you're just like walking on the edge of a cliff, because you just don't want to say something or get caught up in something that's going to push your son away, and so you approach it so delicately. And Keith really supported that. We worked on making those moments very real, and finally when he got in the house, so it's sort of a sequence of car into the house finally, and he's able to have some righteous indignation there, which was a lot of fun, and yet still with a little bit of humor. So I love the track of the character, and finally, of course, Frankie comes to his home, after all the discussion, and at that moment Ray's really able to be his most vulnerable, and let him, hopefully see and experience his dad, his real dad, in a different way, more grown-up way, I think. And I just love those transitions and that arc. It was such a interesting and unusual choice to make, I think, as a writer, and for the relationship, it seemed really appropriate to me.
Like it's across your face for just about 2 or 3 seconds, but when he asks how Ray met Brendan, and there's just sort of that moment of just like, oh, he's asking about my life, and there's an opportunity, like you're saying. There's a little bit of an opening that we can talk about things. It's a beautiful moment.
Well, there's a whole lot of things that go through your mind. You just sort of like, okay, and then you're like, do I want to share? How much do I want to share? How much do I want to reveal? Is he ready to hear what I have to say? Do I temper it? Do I not? So all those sort of things that sort of flash by in a moment, and we worked on that a little bit, and it went pretty well.
We're going to take some questions from the audience in just one moment, and we have a mic. But I also just want to say one last thing about that scene, which is that I love that it's anchored to that scene in the closet when he's giving him the coat, and Ray is saying, he's may fit of it, may not, but when he puts it on, just that gentle, like, you look very sophisticated. It's this notion of like his son is now at a different era of his life, a different moment in his life, and his father is helping him be a more sophisticated man. And I just think that in its writing and its playing, it's just such a beautiful moment, and it says so much.
I think as a father, that really resonated with me. You see your children, and suddenly they surprise you with their adultness, I guess. I see that in my son. He's just 10 and a half, and all of a sudden I'm seeing him, not an adult yet, but an older version of what I'm used to seeing, and that was what happened in that scene.
Yeah, it's so beautiful and so nuanced in so many ways. But we have a microphone in the audience. If anybody has a question, raise your hand up really high, because we have a very bright light in our face. Right, we can see you.
This movie has my 5 favorite adolescent movies, from Stand By Me, This Boy's Life, when Leonardo DiCaprio got a kiss on his cheek by his gay friend. It nails so many of my favorite adolescent movies. William Wordsworth, who was as good as Shakespeare, said, genius is nothing more than the ability to recall your childhood at will. So you two are both geniuses. You did a really good job. Quick question to the cast, quick question to the director. I've seen your body language and your empathy about people who've committed suicide. Would you ever reconsider doing anything, collaboration on any aspect of suicide? There was 2 directors and producers from New York who lost a 15-year-old son. It was Boy Interrupted, and they documented their son from age 5 wanting to commit suicide. He was going to a $45,000 a year school, prep school, or York Prep. So many of my heroes are dying from suicide, like Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington. Would you ever reconsider doing something on that? And to the cast, how are you liking New York City? What have you seen? What have you not seen? What are you going to come back to see? You said last night it's your first time. Do you tour together? Do you just do your own thing?
No, we've been doing everything together. I'll let Keith answer first. It's a bit of a heavy question in comparison.
We went to Bubby's for breakfast this morning. I guess so. I mean, if there was something that really rose up and it felt like it was important and it could be genuinely helpful in the world and it could transcend the suffering to suggest or indicate something, a greater possibility and a greater beauty and depth, then maybe.
So back to New York.
What did we do on the first day? We went to the 9/11 Memorial.
Yeah, Freedom Tower.
And the observatory, is that called the Freedom Tower?
Yes.
So we saw the observatory, so we got a 360 view of New York. Stunning city, by the way. Beautiful city. And then what did we did some shopping in Soho today.
Right.
Some outlet stores. Not bad, you guys, not bad.
If you want to come with us tomorrow, feel free.
And most importantly, you guys have heard the subway rumble here in the Angelika, right?
Many times.
Yeah.
I thought it was an earthquake yesterday, and then the second time I thought it was an aftershock, and I was alone in the green room and sincerely thought I was going to die.
Next question, everybody has, there were a couple of hands on the aisle. I want to make sure we get to them right here on the right-hand side. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. This is for Keith. I'm wondering what the significance of the title is.
The title is, in my mind, it has to do with the fact that as individuals, in the face of societal norms or family norms or anything around us that sort of seems like it's telling us who we are is not right in some way, or we can't be who we are, that we can often feel small in the face of that. So we can be a bunch of people go around feeling small and kind of curtailed, or we can be people who are truly being ourselves, and that makes us giants.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Next question, there's a couple of hands back there. Pat, right here.
I don't study film at all, but I was really interested in the imagery in this movie, particularly in the scene that's happening in the poster. As far as I remember, we don't actually see that scene, right? Instead, the scene that's actually, with this shot is in the movie, it's actually Natasha who he's looking at. So I was wondering if there's any significance to that. What's happening in the poster versus what's happening in the scene, in the movie, whatever.
Well, it's interesting. This is one of our favorite shots in the film. This beautiful look of Josh's as Frankie, and it's as beautiful when he's looking and listening to Natasha, Frankie, as it is when he's looking here in the poster. Which, you're right, was created for the poster to be able to express the crux and the central conflict of the story, which is what's happened between these two friends and how are they going to deal with it, which is, of course, the central story. And it's just beautiful about friendship and love. There's a lot going on. So we signed off on this poster when it was brought to us because we were like, this says a lot, and it leaves a lot to open up to the audience. So
It's very observant of you. I actually never noticed that.
Yeah, I had no idea.
I'm going to rip off that for just a second and talk about the importance of the flare and how you guys came to it and how beautiful it is to have that sort of symmetry in terms of the characters looking at that flare and what it represents. We're going to talk about how it kind of came to be and how that conversation was like.
Yeah, well, I guess in writing, at some point, I got the idea or image of the flares. I honestly don't remember the moment so much. She does, so she'll tell you. But
he called me. He was very excited about this idea of the flares. I think it just came to you one afternoon writing, and he was very excited.
I think I called him and told him to write it in.
Yeah, Josh was actually sure.
So yeah, it's I just thought it was a beautiful, in that initial scene when they are riding their bikes, and I thought it was just a beautiful thing that really represented their unity. I mean, there's two, I imagine these bright lights above them shining, which kind of represented them, and there's a sense of elation and victory, have just conquered these other bad guys in the parking lot. And then at the end again, when Frankie's doing it on his own, it seemed like it was like him saying like, I'm here, and the light, the color, it's a beautiful thing. And I liked also how it tied them all together, the three of them, even though they weren't together, it still tied them together.
Yeah. And also, it's a symbol we often think of people in distress, and in fact, here it's almost like an explosion, a celebration of oneself. Right? Exactly, a song of himself.
Yeah, I think it's also because it's an object that's shared between Frankie and Dallas at the very beginning. So I think it being used at the end, from Frankie's perspective, is kind of a message to Dallas saying, "I'm at peace with myself. Whenever you're at peace with yourself, you come talk to me." So it's kind of a beautiful. Right?
I was lovely because, yes, similar distress, and at the end it's obviously had its arc, but it always seemed to me that it was like Frankie being like, I am here.
Yeah, an announcement about himself, yeah. We have time for about one or two more if anybody has any questions, sir. Okay.
Thank you. Congratulations, it's a great film. I guess this is going to go to Josh and Kyle. At the very end, in the scene where the father and son come full circle, I wanted to reach onto the screen and give you a big hug. And I was wondering why, was there a certain reason why it wasn't written in there? Did you have that urge to give the hug and vice versa? Because, like I said, it was just something I wanted to do because I think you needed it at that point.
I think it's all in the writing, and then when we start the story, Frankie and his dad are obviously not in a good place, and I think for them to come from a place of Frankie storming out of good advice that he's getting from his father to him embracing his father, him putting on a sport coat that he's giving him, which is symbolic of Frankie taking another chapter in his life, and him kind of welcoming his dad's advice and welcoming his love into, incorporating that into who he is as a person, I think speaks volumes, and maybe more so than a hug or a physical embrace ever would, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add, just sometimes I think you want to leave a little room for the audience to.
You did.
Yeah. And I think that often, as actors, I should speak for myself, you want to fill in all the colors and the dots and everything, and I've learned over time, age, sometimes it's better just not to do that. And I think in this instance, I think the script is so strong in allowing the audience to fill in a lot of the area, which I think makes it really powerful.
Thank you.
Thanks for acknowledging that.
I think that if you leave, like Kyle, basically what Kyle is saying is I agree with everything he's saying, and I think I would say that that it creates a slight, not quite tension, but it creates a liveliness, where it's still alive. It's still, if you complete everything, then it's just, there it is. And it's not really alive anymore. If you leave it a little bit open, then there's an ongoing sort of reverberation, I think, that people feel. And
brings up another thought, which something I love about the film is that it doesn't spell it out for you, but you obviously know it, and that's a communication between Frankie and his parents. That his mom played the great Maria Bello. Let's have a round of applause, by the way, for her. She couldn't buy out. She's amazing in it too, but that sense that we don't see Frankie discuss things with his mom, but she knows it, so we get to that point. And then the scene when there's sort of that détente and Ballas and his dad, played by Peter Outerbridge, and Ray shows up, and there's sort of this nice symmetry. There's a kind of a connectivity between Ray and Frankie, even though they aren't necessarily looking at each other. There's obviously this sort of unseen, unspoken connection that they're kind of moving closer to each other, and Frankie's family addresses things in a way that obviously Valis and his family doesn't. They are brushing everything under the rug, including the incident with the bike. And it's a sort of a beautiful incident of filmmaking and acting sort of kind of coming together to tell us things without necessarily announcing it. And it's really a beautiful sort of nuance that's going on. Yeah. We have time for one or two more questions. I thought there was one on that aisle as well in the back, but right here. Yeah.
I'm going to get really fast answers.
We'll do that one and then this one right here. Thanks.
I'm going to talk really fast.
Hi, this question's for Keith. I was just curious why the choice to not have any of the gay teammates help out Frankie. Nobody seemed to speak up for him.
Thanks so much for my fast answer. I don't know. Next question. No, I guess why? I don't know. I didn't think about it. It just didn't seem like that's what was going to happen. I don't know.
They've been through so much already. I would stand down too, I think, in my position. I wouldn't want to become a target.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's just the environment that they when the fight actually happens, when Frankie gets beat up, they're kind of just sitting there cheering. And when we actually shot that scene, I asked the twin teammates, the extras, I said, like, what would actually happen in this case? And they shockingly said, well, we'd all pull our phones out. And so I think Valis walks away. He's the alpha guy. He's the guy who, in the previous scene, would have broke the fight up. And he walks away, and Frankie's just left on his own. I think that's just how it is in some cases.
And I think at the end, Keith really wanted to get the look from Michael, who is the initial boy at the beginning, who was being harassed by Connor. And when Frankie comes back to the pool, Michael gives him a look like, okay, you found your voice, and he gave him the space to do it in his own way instead of. I thought that was actually a really nice subtle quality to the whole arc there.
Yeah. You also just get the sense that it's high school and everyone's on their own journey and kind of going through their own hurdles. We'll wrap up with this question right here in the white chair. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll be really quick. First, congratulations to all you guys. Fantastic movie. I saw some photos on Facebook of you guys location scouting, and I was wondering what the significance was to filming in that part of Ontario.
Well, so yeah, the question about the significance of shooting in that part of Ontario. So we really wanted it to feel universal, and hopefully it does. And we have, we've traveled to film around the world, film festivals everywhere, from Korea to Estonia, Sweden, Mexico, all of Australia.
Keep bragging.
And so what we wanted is that, this story, Keith grew up in a very small town, and this is, he's drawing obviously on a lot of he's a very personal storyteller, and we knew that if we set it in a metropolis like New York or Toronto, and maybe the believability of this happening in a high school that size would be a little more challenging. But there are many, many, many centers all over the world, all over North America, where this kind of, let's call it, with, I guess, toxic masculinity or the homophobia or the fear, just general, pervasive way of thinking and fear, really, persists. So we wanted that to feel like it could be anywhere that we're familiar with. So Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which is right across the river from Sault, Michigan, really fulfilled that. And it's a beautiful community where it really opened up the doors to us, and the city became our set, so we had a lot of freedom. I had filmed a couple of films there before, so I knew that it was going to provide us what we needed, and Josh filmed the film, and of course we knew he liked it. So.
Me and her.
That's true. So yeah, we just really wanted it to feel like it could be anywhere that we could transplant our own, the audience could really transplant their own interpretation onto, but see that it was,
So
relatable.
It's like small enough to know everyone and yet large enough to feel lost in at the very basis of it. Yeah, it's so universal and it is so beautifully done. Congratulations to all of you on your opening weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, Darren, Josh Wiggins, Darren, Mann, Taylor Hickson, and Kyle MacLachlan, the Family Giant Little One. Thank you all so much.